undersea cables. Mr. President, the oceans transcend the states and they connect all of them. And we should harness this potential in order to create wealth. This is the essential of what it means to develop a blue economy, that is to establish partnerships that will enable us to make use and exploit our oceans, and also a paradigm for action leading to sustainable development. That is why the strategy of blue economy should depend on three principles: enhancement of economic activities and the maritime activities, the safeguard of natural resources and ecosystem services, and the establishment and the creation of sustainable jobs and growth. We have to ensure that oceans create opportunities for our peoples. More than 80% of the people of Djibouti live on the coast. That is why we think that inclusiveness, ownership, and the empowerment of the coastal people and communities are essential for the implementation of blue economy before we can think of other world supply chains. We need to guarantee the local capacity, legitimize, regulate, and establish opportunities. Mr. President, the awareness of the possibilities of the oceans by our societies and also is associated to sensitization about the threats and also the threat to maritime and climate change, because this can unleash a dynamic for a better system of protection and sustainable use of marine resources. The preservation and protection of our oceans will guarantee the sustainability of our planet. And this preservation should be accompanied by action. That is, to fight against inequalities and the harmful practices that impede and affect the governance of oceans. Illegal fishing, unlimited commercial and industrial fishing, the dumping in the toxic waste in our oceans are major risks to our planet. This conference should, in fact, be the point of departure for the trajectory of development of our oceans and seas. We are aware of the African potential as regards blue economy, but also our vulnerability. That is, to unleash the potential of blue economy will regenerate in Africa and beyond, and will demand the mobilization of adequate financial resources, because the capacities of our states to take advantage of blue economy remains inadequate. In spite of many commitments made by the international community as regards adaptation to climate change and increase and enhance resilience, our achievements in fact remain below what is expected and what is demanded. That is why Africa continues to urge our partners to develop and honor their commitments, because the development of blue economy is in line with the spirit of sustainability and resilience that is recommended by Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, and is a breath of oxygen for our countries and for our deserts. I thank you.
Another round of applause for President Ismail Omar of Djibouti. Let me now take this opportunity to invite the Vice President of Namibia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, President William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, Head of State and Government, Ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to extend warm greetings from the Republic of Namibia, specifically from Dr. Hage Gottfried Geingob, President of the Republic of Namibia, to you, President William Ruto, for your excellent leadership in the fight against climate change and for hosting this very important and timely summit on climate change. I further extend my gratitude to you and to the people of Kenya for the excellent way this summit has been organized and the warm hospitality extended to my delegation since our arrival in this beautiful city of Nairobi. As Your Excellency have said, I'm finally happy to have returned home to East Africa. Today, I wish to shed light on the effect and impact of climate change on Namibia and her people. Namibia's geographical location in southwest corner of Africa, with its vast desert landscape and arid climate, make it particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Rising temperatures, erratic rainfall patterns, and prolonged droughts are becoming more frequent and tense, wreaking havoc on the country's economy, on our environments, and of course, affecting our people. Agriculture, a cornerstone of Namibia's economy, is significantly affected. Prolonged droughts and unpredictable rain patterns lead to the reduced crop yields, livestock losses, and increased vulnerability to food insecurity. As a result, farmers struggle to provide for their families and to contribute to the nation's food production. The impact on rural community is thus severe, exacerbating poverty and inequality. Moreover, climate change exacerbates the water scarcity challenges facing our country. With limited fresh water resources and a growing population, the demand for water is increasingly high. However, as temperature rises and rainfall becomes erratic, rivers and water bodies dry up and groundwater reserves deplete. This scarcity not only affects drinking water availability, but will also impact on agriculture, industrial activities, and hydropower generation. The water crisis strains communities, hinders economic development, and threatens social and communal stabilities. Your Excellencies, these challenges are not unique only to Namibia, as the whole continent experienced similar, if not worse, consequences of climate change. We need to be clear in our message to the international community as it relates to what some refer to as climate injustice or climate justice. The global response to the effect of climate change in Africa should be characterized by agency, collaboration, and support. Africa, as a continent, is particularly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, despite contributing minimally to global greenhouse gas emissions. Developed nations must fulfill their commitment to provide financial and technical assistance to African countries. Adequate funding is crucial to support adaptation and mitigation efforts, improving structural resilience, and promote sustainable development. Technology transfer and capacity building initiatives can empower African nations to implement climate-friendly solutions and maximize their potential for clean energy generation and sustainable agriculture. As Africans, we need a stronger voice, unity, and wield more international influence to bring around the necessary change on the continent for the betterment of our people if we want to realize, and I quote, the Africa we want, in line with Agenda 2063. By working together, we can build a more resilient Africa, mitigate the impact of climate change, and ensure a sustainable future for the continent and all its people. I'm therefore positive that through the Nairobi Declaration, we send a clear message to international community and especially to our partners present here at this conference that the time to act is now. Merci beaucoup. Obligation. Obrigado. Thank you all. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Now it's my opportunity to request the Vice President of Colombia, my sister, to come and make her remarks. Your Excellency, Madam Vice President. She is the first woman of color to be Vice President of Colombia. Welcome.
Buenas tardes. Saludo al presidente.
I greet the President of the Republic of Kenya, William Ruto. I greet the excellent President of Comoros, Azali Assoumani, His Excellency Oussa Faki, the President of the African Union Commission, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, all the presidents, leaders, ministers, the media, and all those present here. In first place, I wish to thank the President Ruto for having invited Colombia to participate in this great summit on climate here in this African continent. I come sent by the President Gustavo Petro, who was invited personally by the President of Kenya, and I'd like to thank him for blessing the central discussion that we have today, as that is a call to all of humanity to care for the great challenges, especially this planetary challenge that is putting into risk the life in the planet. As an African descendant woman, I'm very proud to be here in the mother continent. From here, my ancestors came. They were slaves when they left, but today I return as a free woman vice president. And that means that we have done, we have chosen freedom, justice and dignity as people. It's an honor for me to be here to form part of this very important discussion, and it is the challenge that we have to, and which our nations face with the climate change. As you have said, Africa is the voice of the planet, but it's also the place where humanity came from. And today, knowing that Africa is giving directions on how to save the big house, the planet. However, it is necessary for this voice to be heard, to be extended to the global south. Today here, Latin America is present, the Caribbeans are present, because we are suffering the same challenges as you are. My country this year, as a government, we have had to face a crisis, a very strong crisis on account of the effects of climate change, floods, which have put in danger the lives of the most vulnerable. But now we have a drought which is starting and which is going to put into danger human life and the life of the fragile ecosystems which form part of this great lung of the world, which is the Amazon and the Pacific region. As we know here, there is another part of this lung of the world, which is the Congo Basin, the region of the Congo, a very strategic region for guaranteeing equilibrium. In this sense, President Gustavo Petro has made several proposals to the world in the United Nations, and today these propositions are placed before you. Whatever has been said today here about how to assume the polycrisis, the different crises that we're experiencing. The crisis of hunger, the crisis of migration, crisis of health, and the pandemic. All this is a sign of this planetary crisis, and of the many crises that derive from the impact on the planet of the climate change. And in this sense, therefore, the countries of middle income, or the vulnerable countries, are the ones that suffer the greatest consequences, as has been said here several times by the speakers. We are not the people responsible for the emissions, but we suffer the greatest consequences of them. And here the problem is a problem of finances. How do we finance the actions that we are carrying out in our countries and in our regions? The real problem is a financial problem. It's not a lack of political will to do something. The real problem is that we don't have the resources, sufficient resources, to look after, to challenge these planetary challenges, to face them. And therefore, we support the proposal of the President of a new reform of the structure of the financial system. We cannot attend this crisis with the same rules and norms of the international financial system, which certainly has a colonial view, or colonialist view, where the rich people sustain themselves in the economy by exploiting the poorer ones. And this colonialist vision will not allow us to challenge the situation that we are experiencing. Therefore, we propose the exchange of debt for climate action. This exchange of debt obviously cannot be in the traditional way as has been done before, because there would not be any just situation. We would not have the sufficient conditions to do properly these exchanges. These exchanges obviously imply special conditions, and one of these proposals is that we should reach agreements, multilateral agreements, to work on this transformation and on the financial system. And in addition, we should together build within this agreement, this multilateral agreement, a plan, an urgent action plan. The planet doesn't have much time. We do not have much time to continue speaking. We have to go into action. And this happens because of political will. The political will of the countries of the North, the G20, who continue emitting gases, but it is not sufficient for us to act in the South if the global North does not take up the challenge of limiting its emission of the gases, as we were saying, as the General Secretary of the United Nations said a few minutes ago. In this sense, therefore, we propose that we should do the same, that what was done in the case of the pandemic. The International Monetary Fund should issue special bonds so that this can contribute to create a global fund to allow the middle-income and vulnerable countries to have the economic conditions to be able to face these challenges. Without this, it would not be possible to advance. Without this commitment to reform the financial system, our countries will continue being drowned in debt, and worse, without getting real responses, solutions to our populations that are dying. As a woman, I celebrate that in this space, in this summit, we are considering the role of women in the policy of life, in this the policy of using our instinct, our maternal instinct to save our mother, the earth, the bigger uterus. Thank you for this invitation, and I repeat, Colombia expresses its commitment to in climate change and its commitment to strengthen South-South relations with Africa and with the Caribbean, which will allow us to give concrete, specific responses and to this planetary challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my sister Francia, for that candid statement, and by the way, Francia has a Kenyan name. She's called Nyawira. And when she came to Kenya, we traced her origin to a place called Meru. So thank you very much, Nyawira. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. A round of applause for Nyawira, Francia. Thank you very much. Now, let me take this opportunity to request my brother, the Prime Minister from DRC, to make his comments briefly, because we've really overshot the runway. Your Excellency, please.
Excellence William Ruto,
Excellency William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and host of this summit. Excellencies, heads of state and government, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Madam von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Mr. Moussa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me to take the floor on this day on behalf of His Excellency Felix Antoine Tshisekedi Chilombo, President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, on the occasion of this African Climate Summit in this magnificent and beautiful Kenya International Conference Center. Like those who took the floor before me, I would like to thank the Republic of Kenya, the sister republic, for the warm welcome accorded to my delegation, and I would like to extend this gratitude on behalf of the President of the DRC. Organized under the thing that is to develop positive solutions for climate in favor of Africa and the world. This summit affords my country the opportunity to meet the expectations as regards the problem of climate, and precepts are based on three fundamental principles, that is, a green economy, biodiversity, and renewable energy. As we can not overemphasize that the DRC is a kind of solution country which imposes on the world because of its potential and innumerable assets, which is an undeniable contribution that is there for the conservation of nature. A favorable ecosystem, our country in fact has huge forest resources and 155.5 million hectares, which is more than 10% of the forests of the Congo Basin, an important reserve and a well of more than 30 gigaton of carbon, and also its potential, the solar energy, which represents 37.7% of Africa and the world. The Democratic Republic of the Congo can, through its hydro electric power, can provide and supply Africa with this energy, and also its young population, its labor force, and which is a great potential. And as President Ruto has said earlier on, the African potential is known. Here, it is a question of transforming this potential and harness this potential in responding to the issues of climate. We, last year, had the crisis, the fact of the deregulation of the wells and the dry season, which in fact had a lean corn season in East Africa, in Central Africa, as well as Southern Africa. And this has destabilized our economies. This has made us more aware of the response that we should give to this climate problem. For me, and the response of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, there are three indispensable ingredients. One is the will, solidarity, and determination. The will is through the honoring of commitments that we make, particularly the countries that pollute, and as regards the carbon tax, as agreed at the COP15, will on financing, innovative financing, and financing green economy, as agreed at the last summit in Paris. And then the investment on energy, the development of value chains here in Africa, and this with a response for jobs for our youth, and the will to enable us, as it has been said here, that is access to financing on fair and equitable conditions, and the reduction of debt of the vulnerable economies through compensation, because it has also been proposed and I think it has to be recalled. And the second ingredient is solidarity. Solidarity as regards projects of common interest. I'm here thinking of and referring to energy, green energy, the needs in energy and the peoples who live in the forest, and also thinking of the Inga Dam, an integrating project, and we are open to proposals so that we need the efforts of each and every one. I can give another example, the agreement between the DRC and Zambia on the development of value chains, solidarity on issues of common interest, as is the case like the Congo Basin, the Amazon, and the Mekong Basin, as called by President Denis Sassou Nguesso. And then solidarity as regards peace and security in order to guarantee the protection of forests, biodiversity, which has been destroyed by various criminal activities. Then determination, which is the third ingredient, in the search for innovative solutions to climate, as it is the case here in Kenya, and then the determination for a better world to be bequeathed to our children, and also the new climate economy, and access to conservation and the rehabilitation and restoration of our forests for the production of, and then regenerative agriculture, and also to ensure food security. It is for this reason that we are in favor of the establishment of a fund for climate change. We also are making an advocacy, and we want to do it on the margins of the General Assembly, which will be organized on 19 September, on a carbon market that will be profitable for Africa, and that will be on the margins of that summit. Through all these issues, we show solidarity, And this should apply not only to Africa but also beyond. I sincerely want to thank President Ruto and all the participants for this opportunity that is afforded to us through this summit, which will contribute undoubtedly to all the meetings on climate. I want to thank you all.
Thank you very much, my brother Thama, for your comments. And another round of applause for my brother Thama. Let me ask that we now prepare the clip from my sister Motley. Just hold it as I give the floor very briefly, maybe 2-3 minutes, to the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Salah Jama from Somalia, if he is there. Okay, if he's not there, can we take the clip from my sister, Mia Motley?
Your Excellency President Ruto of Kenya, Your Excellency Azal Assoumani, President of Comoros and Chairperson of the African Union, I'd like to thank you for co-hosting such an important summit. Thank you also to Your Excellency UN Secretary General, my dear friend and brother, Antonio Guterres, and to Presidents, Honorable Ministers, and everyone present for contributing to this remarkable occasion. We are gathered here today for what is truly an important summit, not just for Africa, but for the entire world. And while I do wish I could join you in person today, please accept my participation by way of this message as I bring this from you from my own shores here in Barbados. President Ruto, you know that Kenya is one of my favorite places, and if I could be there, I would be there. My friends, so many people across the globe are now imperiled and impacted by the climate crisis and the interconnected impacts that take place, such as pollution and deforestation. The world has discussed and debated all of this. But the fact is that for too long, we have done far too little. And as I said in Paris, we're not moving at the pace or with the scope that is necessary to tackle the environmental decline if we are to safeguard our people and our planet. The climate crisis affects everybody, but particularly it has devastating consequences, life and death consequences, for the very poorest and most vulnerable. And they come from countries who didn't help cause it. But my friends, we still have a choice. We can continue to talk amongst each other, seeking perfection or even casting blame, while the world literally burns. Or we can choose to transform our future. We can choose to shape it. To do so, we've said all along, we need to take action now, and at the pace and the scope that matters. And why with such urgency? We now live in a world of superlatives. I call it the season of superlatives, the hottest, the rainiest, the warmest. Everything is breaking new barriers and new records for the Guinness Book of World Records. And yet every day we continue to do nothing or enough as we see the impacts of the climate crisis. We need to stop talking and we need to do. The Bridgetown Initiative is an action plan that we've identified to make the world a better place, only because we live in a world where capitalism and money dominate so much that unless we unlock the financing mechanisms, we're not going to be able to take the necessary action at scale and with speed. At its core, the Bridgetown Initiative sets out how we can rebuild the international financial architecture to be fit for purpose, so that countries like ours and yours are no longer disadvantaged by systems that were not built with us in mind when they were established. Now is the time to do what needs to be done. There's no other word. N-O-W, a simple three-letter word, now. We are at the crossroads for humanity. And this, my friends, is a time when political will, matched by the recognition of our reality, will make all the difference in the world. I know that many of us recognize this who are there today at this Africa Summit. Your countries and your people continue, like mine and ours in the Caribbean and across SIDS, to face the brutal effects of this climate crisis. And we also face, of course, that climate financing gap that is limiting your ability to respond effectively. This cannot and this should not be. Brothers and sisters, I say to you today that it is up to everyone to do all they can to ensure the continued health of our nations. We must work together from the African continent to the Caribbean. Understanding nature and the climate crisis does not respect the boundaries which man holds fast to as borders. Indeed, I say now it doesn't matter because we're seeing it in the north, in the east, the west, and the south. We must stand up for what is right. We must share a sense of responsibility to our environment and indeed to the loss of biodiversity on land and in our oceans. We must share a sense of responsibility to each and every generation. We, my friends, are capable of achieving common goals, but we can only do so when we share that sense of responsibility to one another. We must be our brothers and sisters' keepers, and we must look to treat others as we would wish to be treated. If we apply these simple precepts that our children live by daily, then I believe that we can begin to see success. I trust that the science will continue to be all at the center of all that we do, and I trust, therefore, that that ability to link science with finance, with public policy action, can make the difference to ordinary people in Nairobi, ordinary people in Bridgetown, ordinary people wherever they are found on this planet. Thank you, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much, my sister Motley, wherever you are, and for your very kind comments. Let me now take this opportunity to ask the Deputy Prime Minister from Somalia, Mr. Jama, to make your statement, and I request my brother to make it brief. Thank you. Thank you for understanding.
President. Your Excellency, President William Ruto, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow leaders from Africa and around the world. On behalf of the President of Somalia, Dr. Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, and the people of Somalia, I would like to express our heartfelt thanks to the President of Kenya for convening this very timely inaugural African Climate Summit. Ladies and gentlemen, across the African continent, from the southern tip to the northern edge of the Sahara, from the Sahel to the Horn, the impact of climate change manifests itself in some very similar, cyclical, and destructive patterns. And it's this common threat that brings us all together to form a unified voice championed by President Ruto. Ladies and gentlemen, Somalia, located in the Horn of Africa, is acutely aware of the profound weight of climate change vulnerabilities. Rising temperatures are very common in Somalia, and the predictions state that by 2040-2060, the temperature will increase by 1 to 1.7 degrees Celsius. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to highlight a set of variables that interact together and render the African states extremely vulnerable and their communities. The era of climate change has become synonymous with the nexus of food insecurity, forced migration, and displacement, coupled with conflict. It has been widely stated here today that over 150 million Africans are subject to food insecurity and hunger. Around 60 million of those are in the Eastern Africa and the Horn region, and 5 million in Somalia. Since much of the African countries are not industrial states, climate change impact affects us at our most vulnerable places. In places like Somalia, pastoral communities and agrarian communities are the most hard hit. So today's very proud livestock herder or a farmer could overnight find themselves in an IDP camp outside the big cities, becoming another added number to climate change vulnerabilities. I would like to allude to an element of combating climate change that has not been widely discussed in this plenary today, and that is our coastlines and the blue economy that President Gayle spoke about. Somalia has the longest coastline in the mainland continent, but overall in Africa, our blue economy is underperforming, and rising water levels, extinction of coral reefs and mangroves, and biodiversity is an imminent threat. For the ocean gives us more than 50% of the oxygen that we consume. Ladies and gentlemen, Somalia annually loses a revenue worth of $300 million to illegal fishing. And I think investment in the sector would allow us to enhance our potential to cope with climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, the final question I would like to raise is how well are the African states and societies situated to combat climate change? I think that point has been very well articulated by the previous speakers. The African states have a unique set of challenges that puts them in a precarious situation. Limited fiscal space, changing global markets and volatility, lack of access to finance at a reasonable rate, all these elements compounded, and the climate change diverts the African states from investing in development and sustainable development goals, and on a regular basis focus on humanitarian interventions. Such an approach should be abandoned, and we must look for more meaningful engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, when droughts hit California, you do not see the death of people. But when droughts hit the Horn of Africa, you see both the death of people and the loss of livestock. So climate change affects Africa in some very profound and immediate ways. Finally, I fundamentally want to agree with the argument put forth by President Ruto that Africa should be and ought to be part of the solution to combat climate change. We have a very young, vibrant population. More than 70% of our population is young. We have 60% of the world's potential in terms of renewable energy. We have the greatest potential for agriculture and livestock. And instead of the world feeding us, Africa has the potential to feed the world. But for that to happen, there needs to be justice and reform in the global financial institution. If we cannot access finances at a reasonable rate, a rate equal to others, then for us bringing about a transformation would be an elusive goal. I'll give you the final example of where Somalia stands today. We are fighting a war against Al-Shabaab, Mr. President. That's why our president could not be here. He is in the front lines. We are finalizing a debt relief HIPC initiative that took us almost a decade, serious fiscal limitations. After we complete the fight against Al-Shabaab and we finish our debt relief program, we will find ourselves in a very interesting situation. Do we go for concessional loans to invest in infrastructure, in human capital, in sustainable development goals, or do we deal with the droughts? We almost averted a famine a year ago. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, in the last 30 years, Somalia has experienced 18 droughts, 2 famines, and equal number of floods. In order for us to develop the resilience and the mechanisms to cope with those things and empower our resilient citizens, we ask for international financial institutions to be reformed, adaptation programs to be increased, and Africans should have a common voice so that we can take it to the next scope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. And I want to confirm as a neighbor the whereabouts of the President of Somalia and give him our regards. Let me take this opportunity. The President of Nigeria passed by and did request me to give a chance, a very brief moment, Minister, 2 minutes. Isaac Adenkule, the Minister of State for Environment from Nigeria. If he is in the house, you have the floor. And, oh yeah, thank you. Minister, please make it brief.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I am here to deliver the Nigerian statement on behalf of my President, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who is unable to be here because he has to be in New Delhi, India, to be part of the summit of G20 leaders. Your Excellencies, President of the African Union, my brother, the President of Kenya, fellow African presidents, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Excellencies, speaking on behalf of Nigeria, I extend my heartfelt congratulations for the landmark occasion that marks the inaugural AU African Summit. This event, as well as our recent efforts and advocacy on the topic of climate change, boldly demonstrates to the global community that Africa is rising to the challenge and taking decisive steps to deliver a sustainable economic future for our people. The African Climate Summit occurs at a pivotal juncture, offering us an exclusive stage to spotlight our priorities, solutions, and needs regarding climate action to the global community. As a continent, it is critical that climate action spurs socio-economic development for us. We know that with robust planning and increased investment in the region, this is achievable. Africa is already bearing the brunt of a climate crisis that it did not cause. But our continent, with our significant renewable energy resources, critical minerals, vast carbon sink, and growing population, can be a strong solution center. Distinguished participants, in Nigeria, we have articulated our unchanging position to advance climate action without jeopardizing economic development. We designed an ambitious energy transition plan to achieve universal access to energy by 2030 and net zero emission by 2060, while prioritizing industrialization, job creation, and economic growth. Significantly, our plan helps to crystallize the scale of resources needed to deliver climate targets, so that by the current financial flows will not suffice. Nigeria's energy transition plan requires 1.9 trillion in spending up to 2060, including 410 billion above business as usual spending. This is additional financing requirement translates to about 10 billion per annum, but average international financing flows to Nigeria for clean energy have been about 655 million per year over the last decades. Similarly, the unconditional target in our nationally determined contributions requires $7.7 billion in investment annually. In 2019-2020, all sub-Saharan Africa received barely approximately $20 billion in climate finance. Annual climate finance flows to Africa are currently just 11% of what we require, so more investments have to come to the continent. For us in Nigeria, we are presently establishing partnerships with both public and private sector players, driving innovative policy changes, advancing renewable energy projects, including on-grid solar and electric vehicle development, and exploring innovative financing mechanisms like carbon trading to lay the foundation for an all-encompassing transition. I recently made public the key focus of my government, captured as an 8-point agenda. Climate action and environmental sustainability is central to achieving 4 of those agendas, which are food security, poverty eradication, sustainable job creation, and security. We recognize that just energy transition partnerships are emerging as an important source of capital for climate-sensitive energy efforts in developing regions, and Nigeria wants to be considered for one. My team is currently working on a proposal to the G7 for the JET-P for Nigeria. It is encouraging that South Africa and Senegal have secured JET-Ps, but they must be scaled up across Africa in addition to other strategic financing opportunities. This summit is essential for highlighting such requests, sharing ongoing efforts, and establishing inter-country collaboration. Mr. President, I assure you and fellow leaders of Nigerian unwavering support as we embark on this journey to clearly communicate Africa's position on climate action and expedite an equitable, sustainable future for all of us. God bless Africa.
Thank you very much, Minister. I will extend another 2 minutes to my brother Ban Ki-moon, if he is still in the house. If he is not, then I will request the Honorable Huang Rungui from China, the Minister for Ecology. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Okay.
His Excellency William Ruto, President of Kenya, His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President of Comoros, Ministers, Heads of State, ladies and gentlemen, greetings to all. I am very honored on behalf of the Chinese government to be invited to join the Africa Climate Summit to discuss with African leaders, friends and colleagues on climate change and sustainable development. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the Government of Kenya and President Ruto Williams to successfully convene this summit. I would like to also thank President Ruto to invite the Chinese government to attend this event. Since the beginning of this year, extreme weather events have occurred frequently around the world. Forest fires in Canada, heat waves and floods in many parts of China, and floods and mudslides in Malawi, among other African states, have caused serious loss of life and property, as well as ecological crisis. Climate change is a global challenge that can only be effectively addressed through solidarity and cooperation. The UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement are hard-won gains, which reflect the greatest global consensus. We should always adhere to the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, equity, and respective capabilities, so as to build a solid political foundation for global climate cooperation. Africa is one of the regions in the world most vulnerable to climate change. Which also plays an important role in the climate governance and actions. Faced with the multiple challenges of development, poverty reduction, and climate change, African countries have taken vigorous actions in adaptation and mitigation, and have made great efforts to realize the goals of the Paris Agreement. China, as the largest developing country with over 1.4 billion population, can totally relate to what Africa is experiencing in face of all the challenges. President Xi Jinping has pointed out that addressing climate change is not something that others want us to do, but something we must do. China has set the goal of carbon peaking by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060 as our NDC. China has taken vigorous actions which have led to positive progress. In this regard, China has become an active player to respond to climate change. Over the last decade, China has supported economic growth of over 6% per year, with only an average annual growth of 3% in energy consumption. Thus, the installed capacity of renewables in China is up to over 1.3 billion kilowatts. And China has brought down the global cost of renewables, contributing significantly to the global response to climate change and emission reduction. China has launched a national carbon market covering 4.5 billion tons of emissions per year. We also produced over half of the global e-mobility vehicles. We have afforested an area of 1.02 billion mu, equivalent to 6.8 million hectares, contributing to a quarter of the world's new forested area. China and Africa has been very effective in climate cooperation in the past 1 decade. We have assisted Africa's low-carbon and climate change adaptation demonstration zones, supported its clean energy infrastructure and smart agriculture, and helped enhance disaster prevention and mitigation in Africa, and also facilitated the implementation of the Great Green Wall program in Africa. In late 2021, China and Africa jointly issued the Declaration on China-Africa Cooperation on Combating Climate Change. As of August 2023, China has signed MOUs with 15 African countries on climate cooperation. I would like to take this opportunity to announce that in order to implement this declaration, China plans to launch the program Africa Solar Belt under the South-South Cooperation on Climate Change to assist relevant African countries in developing and utilizing solar energy, address power shortage, and transition to green and low-carbon development. Development is the way to enable people to live a better life, a top priority for developing countries. Recently, President Xi Jinping has launched new initiatives such as the Support for Africa's Industrialization Initiative and China's plan for the modernization of African agriculture. We are ready to work with African countries to deepen cooperation in climate actions and sustainable development, and to join hands in promoting green, low-carbon modernization. Meanwhile, we also call on developed countries to proactively shoulder their historical responsibility and fulfill their commitment to provide developing countries with at least $100 billion every year in climate finance. As President of CBD COP15, I would like to also call for your attention to the intrinsic linkage between biodiversity and climate change. I have heard a lot of remarks just now which have mentioned the rich biodiversity and forest resources in China. In Africa, containing huge carbon sink. China would like to work with the international community to fully implement the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and to create harmony between man and nature. Finally, I wish this meeting every success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let me now take this opportunity for another 2 minutes to ask my brother Achin Steiner, the UN Undersecretary responsible for UNDP, to make some brief remarks. That is another Kenyan from a place called Nakuru.
Asante sana, Mr. President, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Heads of State and Government, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. A great deal has been said this morning, but I'm still inspired, if I may say so, by your speech this morning, Mr. President. And with that, I take a license for a moment to take you back to a year in Kenya's history when you were 15 and I just a little bit older. It was the year that in Olkaria in Hell's Gate National Park, the first geothermal unit was installed. I mention this because the journey of Kenya in so many ways represents, when it comes to the energy sector, to leadership, to transition, to many of the things that you spoke about this morning, reflects what happens when people do not take the answer, it's not possible, it's not doable, it's too expensive, too seriously. Hell's Gate National Park is only about an hour outside Nairobi. Kenyans know it well. Visitors, please visit it, because it is today one of the most remarkable places, the backbone of Kenya's electricity generating economy. That first Mitsubishi turbine installed in 1981 was installed against a great deal of skepticism. I learned about this history during the years that I spent here. It took many pioneers to envisage it. Today, Mr. President, I believe that Olkaria, with its various generating turbines, generates almost 1,000 megawatts of electricity. And ladies and gentlemen, you are in a country that may very well become the first country in modern history to actually generate its entire electricity supply with clean energy sources. Kenya today is a country that has passed the 92% mark, and it is no longer alone. In fact, Mr. President, there is another country in South America I visited and I did not know. Uruguay today, well over 90% of its electricity supply with renewables. This is not to say that every country can follow the same path, but what we do in UNDP, and why I'm so proud to be here together with my Secretary General and so many of the partners that are today invested in precisely the kind of vision that you have laid out for Africa, is that we can be partners. We have listened, we have learned together, and today, as UNDP, 36 countries on the African continent have invited UNDP to help them undertake integrated national financing frameworks to address this continuously frustrating reality that this continent is asked to borrow for things that it was neither responsible for nor it can afford to borrow in this world of today. That is why looking at finance with the kind of lens that you have both spoken to this morning is so important. Secondly, also pioneering projects such as solar mini-grids, another major enterprise of UNDP. For the first time in history, we are supporting 21 African countries to try and connect over the next few years 260 million people to electricity supplies. A $65 billion investment opportunity, but it needs hard work, both to prepare the ground, to find the investors, and to then roll it out. And finally, Mr. President, let me just commit to you, in the presence of so many leaders from across the continent, the United Nations Development Programme, as part of the United Nations family, as you heard from the Secretary General this morning, is deeply committed to Africa's future transitions, coming out of the reality of today, but investing every day across the continent. I'm proud to today lead an organization within our UN development system that is literally present in every African country on this continent. We are invested in terms of your nationally determined contributions. We are invested in your energy transition just as deeply as we're invested in poverty eradication and ultimately a future for Africa that you spoke so eloquently this morning. Thank you so much for the privilege of addressing you today, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Steiner. I guess everybody, when they get a chance, they speak about their village. The Olkaria, where Steiner has very passionately talked about, is in his county of Nakuru. Thank you very much. Now, let me give another 2 minutes. Finally, this is the final one, to Bill Gates on video for 2 minutes, and then we will move the program to the next stage.
Hello. I want to thank President Ruto for convening this event and prioritizing this important work. I started work on climate change over 2 decades ago after I left my full-time work at Microsoft, and I was focusing on fighting poverty and fighting diseases. When I visited Africa, I saw 2 things. First was how climate is already affecting agricultural output, although they've contributed almost nothing to these greenhouse gas emissions because they're dependent on farming, they're near the equator, they're already experiencing more damages than other countries. But I also saw the energy shortage, and we need Africa to have lots and lots of energy to develop their economies. It's fantastic that the African researchers and companies are now thinking about how they can reduce their emissions and continue to grow their economies. Breakthrough Energy is the organization I created to help with climate mitigation. The goal is to innovate, to make the cost of being clean far, far less. And that means we can reduce the emissions and avoid this temperature increase that has such a negative impact. Late last year, I was in a farm in eastern Kenya, and they were experiencing drought. And so I talked through with Mary, who was the farmer, how the new seeds and new approaches were helping her. She had drought-tolerant seeds that made a very big difference. She also had chickens that were bred so they could be more heat tolerant. And because of those new tools that were empowering her, she was expecting to do well despite the tough climate challenge that she faces. And so this is just one example, but by helping with better tools, allowing farmers like her, who are very innovative, to do new things, we can minimize these damages. I've seen there's African researchers work on innovations in fertilizer, making sure these new crops fit their ecosystems and getting those seeds out, getting them approved, and making sure they're low cost. So we do need to invest, whether it's in the innovation or the deployment, getting resources against those, including the promised support from rich countries, will be very, very important. The global goal on adaptation, which will be finalized at COP, should lead to more investment to help Africa deal with these challenges. And so we need partnerships. We need government, philanthropists, businesses to come together to focus on climate adaptation. Yes, we need mitigation, but adaptation doesn't get the energy it deserves. And so I'm excited that you've come together. I'm excited to work with all of you to solve this problem. So thank you for your efforts.
So ladies and gentlemen, as we now wait, we're going to take a very short interlude of music. And at this point, can we all just stand up and stretch a little bit? Just stand up wherever you are. see whether we can stretch. I'm sure some of us have been sitting for long, long periods of time. So the next part we're coming to is the new global climate finance architecture. This is a centerpiece and a part that we've been waiting for all this time. And therefore, thank you so much for your patience. You can sit down now. You can take your seats. I just wanted you to stand up and stretch for a little bit. And this is definitely going to be one of the highlights of this whole conference. So we request that we just remain patient, and this is where we are heading from here. So I request that we have a short interlude of music just to get us ready for the next session. As mentioned, it's a new global climate finance architecture that is coming up right here. So for now, let's have the interlude of music as we get ourselves ready. Once you've stretched enough, you may take your seats.
Africa, rise, rise, Bambazuka. Let us all rise, rise, Bambazuka. Africa, rise, rise, Bambazuka. PPMC. Let us all rise, rise, Bambazuka. We are part of the solution. I am part of the solution. We are part of the solution. You are part of the solution. We are part of the solution. I am part of the solution. Africa flows. We have all it takes to change the climate story and show ourselves in all our splendor and glory. Yeah. Let's come together now. To bring down all barriers for a greater tomorrow. So Africa, solutions made in Africa. Speak with one voice. Sing the word. Africa, rise, Papa Zuka. Let us all rise, Papa Zuka. Africa, rise, Papa Zuka. Let us all rise, Papa Zuka.
And I know as I stand here before you, we are actually having all the audience from South Africa all the way to Djibouti, from all the way Mozambique to Morocco, and across Uganda all the way to Nigeria. So this is Africa, and Africa is talking, and they have been heard. We want to thank you most sincerely. As you continue around, we want to say the action is now. We have waited for long. That is what Africa is saying. And thank you so much, and may God bless you.
Sante, let's give a clap to Dr. Chumo and also for Wanjira Mathai for doing a fantastic job. Let's give them a good clap. Asante sana Wanjira, you've taken the sessions very well. At this point, Your Excellency, we are coming near to the end, and I would request if I can just have a photo with the panelists or with Wanjira. So Wanjira, if you can come back, and then I'll request the panelists you're with to come down here, and then you can take one photo. And then secondly, the second one we'll take with the panelists that were taken by Dr. Susan Chomba. So, Adlostia, kindly welcome to the front. Hans, welcome to the front. And also Miss Kristin, welcome to the front. We take one photo, and then we'll be followed by the other panelists, then we close. Your Excellencies, welcome.